The SQ-80 and ESQ-1 have some really deep programming possibilities that aren't even hinted at in the owner's manuals, so I'm going to try and categorize some of that in this video. You may already know some of this stuff, so the contents are listed in the description. Number 1. First of all, a lot of especially excellent programming ideas and patches come right out of the Transoniq Hacker magazine, which was published from 1985 to 1999. The link to the online archive is in the description. Not only are there articles, but also a column called Hacker Patch, where readers submitted their own patches. I've learned a lot from those. I'll be showing scans of some relevant article titles during the video. Buchty also has on his website digital copies of the synthesizer manuals in case you got a used instrument without one, or lost your original one like an idiot. Unfortunately, Winter took off this really fun link that's still active. What a buzzkill! Number 2. Here are 11 differences between the ESQ-1 and SQ-80, some of which could affect how you'd create a patch. A. Cosmetic differences. On the SQ-80 some of the stuff on the control panel got moved around a bit. But the most important difference is where the ESQ-1 has black, white, and yellow buttons with a white racing stripe. The SQ-80 has grey, red, and blue buttons with red and grey racing stripes. And it changed from a black control panel to a grey one. But then, not only is the ESQ-1 different from the SQ-80, it's also different from itself. B. On the SQ-80 only, one output jack also doubles as a stereo headphone jack. I have no sympathy for anyone who's trying to look at this on a smartphone. C. Only the SQ-80 has MIDI through. D. Frequency response. Some changes in component values on the SQ-80 output stage resulted in a very slightly brighter overall sound. Many can't hear any difference, but there are those who say that the ESQ-1 has a punchier sound as a result, especially on certain bass patches. E. The ESQ-1 sequencer is said to come stock with a 2,400 note capacity, which you can expand to 10,000 or 20,000 with a sequencer upgrade that has volatile memory. The SQ-80 comes with 20,000 notes stock. But of course all of that would be before any modulator activity is added in. F. The SQ-80 has a disk drive. G. The SQ-80 has a polypressure keyboard. But if I understand correctly, the ESQ-1 will respond to polypressure over MIDI. H. The ESQ-1 claims to have 32 waveforms and the SQ-80 75 waveforms. But that's a whole other story that's way too big for this video. I. The ESQ-1 has more hidden waveforms. Both synthesizers were actually created with 256 waveform location positions available, but most of those are not used and therefore hidden by Ensoniq. These hidden waves access the existing waveform data in a random and often really inappropriate manner. They usually just sound like a big bunch of boogers. But ways have been made available to access those on the oscillator pages. The 43 waveforms between octave plus 5 and drums 5 are used on the SQ-80 but not on the ESQ-1. So some patch creators have put some of those extra hidden waves to very clever and effective use. You can hear some absolutely groovy examples on YouTube. J. There's an option in the SQ-80's envelopes at the T4 stage called second release that gives a bloody cool fake reverb effect. K. The velocity parameter has a different exponential option on each synthesizer as these owners' manual excerpts illustrate. And, where both synthesizers have a velocity parameter in their envelope levels, only the SQ-80 also has an exponential option there. I don't envy any silly person who's trying to read this on an iPad. Number 3. In the Transoniq Hacker magazine there have been articles on making patches with stereo effects. There are the more basic stereo applications such as using the keyboard 2 modulator to spread the patch across the stereo field, and an L.F.O. for stereo tremolo. Some of my patches use a very slow L.F.O. to give random stereo placement to each voice individually. In 2019, the new UDO Super 6 synthesizer was boasting how it could create stereo sounds by layering detuned pairs of oscillators panned to opposite sides, which was what the ESQ-1 was doing almost 30 years earlier. What a poser! So for an example of that, I'm taking a simple patch, copying it, layering it, detuning one of the layers, both in the oscillators and the filter, and then panning them to opposite sides just like the UDO Super 6 does. Anyone who's trying to listen to this through a single speaker is just stupid. But be warned, you should only layer one patch, never both to each other, because of mutual layering conflicts that destroy the stereo effect. That's one of the mysterious operating system quirks that's referred to as a Malvernian secret. Number 4. Okay, recreating effects on the ESQ-1 and SQ-80 is a huge thing. Some poopy pants programmers emphasize that it sounds empty or dry with no outboard effects added. Although that can be true if you actually program your patches to sound that way. But with me that caused quite a kerfuffle because so many effects can be simulated very satisfactorily on these older Ensoniqs. From the very earliest synthesizers, people have been detuning oscillators for a chorusing effect. Here's a patch that simulates the supersaw waveform by chorusing 6 sawtooth waves together with adjustable detuning. And here's a layered stereo vocal pad that's made quite grandiose by detuning all of the oscillators. But be careful, don't just detune by adjusting oscillators upward in pitch or you'll end up with a final patch that's a little sharp and out of tune. Try to detune as much down as you do up to keep your patch on pitch. As in the second release function on the SQ-80, you can combine two envelopes to generate that same reverb effect on either synthesizer. The primary envelope for the main shape of the sound, and the reverb envelope with a lower level and longer sustain to create the reverb effect. It's more realistic if you apply them to the filter as well as the DCA. This gives you the freedom to adjust all of the individual parts of the sound however you want so you can get the various categories of reverb. Absolutely cracker! Use more primary envelope for quieter, and/or darker reverb, and more reverb envelope for a brighter, and/or louder reverb. Here's a brief excerpt from a CD where two patches were recorded directly from an SQ-80 with no effects added. But you may have heard that where the 8 voice limit was reached, some of the reverb tails were being cut off because of voice stealing. Somebody call a constable. One additional subtle trick is to exaggerate the detuning a little, then use the primary volume envelope to put them back in tune. That way, upon key release the oscillators go back to their more detuned setting, creating a reverb tail that's realistically more diffused than the main part of the sound. And you can even use the primary envelope as a palm modulator so that the main part of the sound and the reverb are separated in space. I invite you to type in these two demo patches and follow along for yourself. Here's a classical riff on a simple patch using the organ waveform. And then here's that same patch with those reverb envelopes added. Wow! See? Some programmers really like the slapback echo sound, which can be done entirely with envelopes. And if you want to, you can also separate the original and the slapback parts in the panning. But using L.F.O.s instead allows for a much larger variety of echo sounds and as many repeats as you want. Here's a patch that uses an L.F.O. sawtooth wave combined with a slowly fading envelope to simulate a bass guitar through a take echo. Here's an L.F.O. square wave take echo patch. This is a stereo version of a Kraftwerk overlapping echo sound that uses envelopes on one layer and an L.F.O. on the other. How cool is that? To get a realistic wah-wah pedal, set your filter parameters to these values. It's more fun than fish and chips. But only a pansy would substitute the mod wheel for that. Here's a picture of an Ensoniq owner who doesn't even have a mod pedal. They're actually surprisingly easy to get. Occasionally an original Ensoniq pedal shows up on eBay or Reverb, but Slinkard has a perfect replacement. And they can even be made out of an old volume or wah-wah pedal and a 10K linear taper potentiometer. Check out Transoniq Hacker issue 44. Number 6. There are a couple of different approaches to duplicating the sound of sample and hold. This patch takes advantage of the lower digital resolution of our L.F.O. waveforms that give audibly separate steps when they're used at their very lowest speeds. Some claim that this is a limitation imposed by the early digital technology, while others exploit this as an extra feature. This patch simulates the effect of sampling a very slow rising sawtooth wave applied to the pitch of an oscillator. You can hear each digital bit, one at a time, that makes up the L.F.O. waveform. This next one uses the L.F.O.'s noise waveform applied to the oscillator's pitch for a random stepping sound that's most typically associated with this effect. And another sample and hold method uses the velocity modulator, this time on the resonant filter's frequency. You would need to play with random force on each note, plus the somewhat random nature of the velocity modulator also helps here. This approach has the advantage that you can play it in any tempo you want. Aces. Number 7. This next trick is one Edgar Winter used back in 1972 in his song Frankenstein to make one of his solos sound more complicated than what he was actually playing. It adds a fast trill that goes up a fourth. That was one cheeky bloke. In this patch it's combined with the wah-wah effect. Just for fun I'll play this example against the isolated original drum track. Number 8. The two modulators, keyboard, and keyboard 2, can be applied to an oscillator's pitch to vary the interval between notes, either more or less. This example uses the keyboard 2 modulator with a negative value to exactly cancel out the automatic keyboard tracking in the oscillators. And notice that the automatic multisampling property does not get cancelled out. Keyboard 2 actually requires a value of -64 to exactly cancel out keyboard tracking, but the maximum value you can enter is -63. So you need to add it in the other modulator position with a value of -1. Go figure. And then to make matters even stranger, the top C key always plays a different note. As to why that is, it's just another one of those Malvernian secrets. Those Ensoniq guys were all crazy bonkers if you ask me. Here's a prank piano sound from one of my patch sets that takes this effect to its limit. Micro-tuning has been a subject of discussion in more than one synthesizer group, the Transoniq Hacker magazine, and even some patch sets. Here's an example of a basic patch that uses the keyboard 2 modulator to spread out 1 octave of notes over 2 octaves of keys. That changes the normal half-step intervals to quarter steps. It's one of the more popular applications, although I personally haven't figured out any use for it. Here's a C major chord, an A C minor chord, and this is what comes in between. That's completely daft. Perhaps you could use that in jazz. Number 9. Combining L.F.O.s is one of the tragically underused features on our synthesizers. 3 L.F.O.s that can be synchronized and locked into exact multiple frequencies opens up a whole can of possibilities. This article in Transoniq Hacker magazine issue 26 has a couple of very useful reference charts that I still use. And here's a patch from issue 54 where I first heard this concept in action. I'll create a simple patch here with the bass waveform to demonstrate the concept. If you like, you can type it into your synthesizer to try it for yourself. I make sure that the reset parameter is turned on at all 3 L.F.O.s so they can synchronize. Now I'm applying a square wave from L.F.O.1 to the pitch of oscillator 1 to get a slow trill. It's applied with a negative value so that it begins on the lower note, then goes up. The modulation amount can be adjusted for any musical intervals you want. Then I turn up the mod wheel to add in another negative going L.F.O. square wave on top of that from synchronized L.F.O.2, at exactly twice the speed. They combine for a simple note pattern. Tons of different possibilities there. Now I'm taking L.F.O.3 at twice the speed of L.F.O.2. But with this one I'm using the sawtooth wave to supply a percussive attack to both DCA1 and the filter. If I play it in the lower registers I get an automatic bass pattern. Absolutely smashing. To give you some more application ideas, here are a few finished patches from my patch sets. I just made this other demo patch that uses L.F.O. sawtooth waves on the oscillator's pitch, which you can type in as well. When the sawtooth waves combine in opposite directions in just the right amount, the slopes cancel each other out and give you a series of steady pitches in a stair-step pattern. And yet another slower L.F.O. applied to the DCAs automatically switches between a rising pattern in oscillator 1 and a descending pattern in oscillator 2. And since the fast L.F.O.2 is a sawtooth wave, I'm also using it to supply a repeating volume envelope. It's one of the stranger things that I've come up with. That's all for the moment. Hope to see you in part 2.